Miracle Church. So there's three catastrophes in history. The first catastrophe is 1776, when there's a big fire that starts because, as I was saying before, New York City was British occupied. So George Washington loses the Battle of Brooklyn, and then because the British came by way of water that way, everyone retreats across the East River, and then they evacuate New York City all the way to the top of Manhattan Island. And the British fully occupy, not Manhattan, but New York City until the end of the war, basically. There are some New Yorkers that are hanging out, hiding. So I always think of them as drunk college students, right? I don't know why, it helps me with the visual, you know. They start to play pranks on the British soldiers because they have no other power. They're not soldiers, you know. They're just patriots. So there's a fire that starts, and the fire leads to burning down about a third of the city. So almost 400 buildings all around this church. The church is not affected. No damage at all to the church. The second fire, 1835, everything around it burns down. It's an accidental fire that year, 1835. About 700 buildings in Lower Manhattan are burned down. The church is saved both times from the neighborhood gathering together and creating a bucket brigade. Everybody know what that is? Should know. It's actually probably a French word, brigade.
Volunteers clearing water.
Yeah, it's basically everybody lines up. It's like there's no fire department, right?
Yeah.
So everybody lines up at the river and they pass buckets up. They go up ladders on either side of the church. They soak the roof with water. So it's not to put the fire out, it's actually to prevent the fire. Yeah. And then, so they do this twice in history, 1776, 1835, and then again, the Twin Towers fall right across the street and no damage. So there you go, Miracle Church. Let me show you this picture right here. This is the back of the church. Now today, you should know that this scaffolding is up here, not because of damage on 9/11. This is done 10 years later. Remember, it's 14 years later now. This is just for restoration. Restoration only. 2 years ago. Not 9/11. No. Right? So, on 9/11, you see how pristine the church looks? Everything is destroyed around it except for the church. So now let me explain to you about this because yeah, and even on the back, you see how it's ash on the back of it. It's like almost white, right? It's like so much ash on the back of it. As a matter of fact, there was ash all in the graveyard. Where it dips down on the other side, I've been told by a security guard that there was about 2 feet of pulverized debris and ash there. Even a computer keyboard in between the gravestones. None of the gravestones here are damaged from 9/11. Now let me jump to the day 9/11. So doing this tour, it's almost like doing 5 tours in one. I like to do a little bit of the old history. We talk about 9/11 the day. You talk about the old buildings, the new buildings, and then you also need to talk about all the politics and bureaucracy that it's been taking to get the new buildings built. Because it's been 14 years, and guess what? We're nowhere near done, right? And way over budget, of course, right? So just to start with the day. Now, I think everybody knows, and I think you're probably my youngest. How old are you? 13. So you were not born yet. But you know, you've seen videos of the Twin Towers falling, the way they fell straight down, right? Now what happens is that the debris, unfortunately, doesn't just pile up neatly on the bottom, right? Because of the momentum of the buildings coming down, the debris shoots out very far and very fast. And it does quite a bit of destruction to the entire area, right? So, see that domed building all the way across behind the orange crane there? That's called the Winter Garden Atrium. That's part of the World Financial Center, all the way across the property and then across the West Side Highway on the other side, between the highway and the Hudson over there, right? That's the World Financial Center, a whole different suite of buildings. Those buildings were also damaged. Windows were broken in, a good dozen stories up. So you see just to the side of that building, there's like a stone building with the smaller windows reflecting, right? That's one of the 4 buildings of the suite of buildings of the World Financial Center. We saw them this morning. Remember we pointed them out because you saw those same roofs? Right. The green roofs, right, exactly. Okay, so the Winter Garden Atrium, all the way across the West Side Highway. The Twin Towers fall, the debris shoots out, shoots across the property, across the West Side Highway, completely covers the West Side Highway, shoots through the windows of the Winter Garden Atrium, shattering the whole front of that inn, shoots over the roof of that building, another full block of gear until it splashes down in the Hudson on the other side. That's how far and how fast it goes, right? Now, it does that in all directions. So it also damages all the buildings around there too. Now, if you haven't gotten your bearings yet, I apologize. I always forget to mention this one little fact. Right in the trees there, that's tower number 1 of the World Trade Center. Right? There's One World Trade Center, or the new One World Trade Center, right? Just to the right of it is number 7 World Trade Center. Remember, we saw it from the Statue of Liberty down that way. It looked like it was behind, right? And shorter, right? So that's number 7 right there. Now, the new number 7 is in the same exact location as the old number 7, right? So just to be clear about that, it's a building that's sort of separate from the original construction in the 70s. A developer comes along named Larry Silverstein, and he decides he wants his own building. So I like to make a joke, he buys the number 7, right? And he gets his 7th building, right? Now he's a much bigger player. So that's number 1, that's number 7. The new number 4 is around the corner. But let's walk over to this map now for a second. I want to show you something. This bell, by the way, was a gift from Westminster. It's called the Bell of Hope, and it's a memorial to all the people that died on 9/11, but also died in London and Madrid and the massacre in Mumbai. So, and also, just to give you this, you know, the British have such an uncanny sense of humor and sense of history that they forged this in the same forgery that the Liberty Bell was forged, right? So then they give this to us. The ringer here, I'm not sure what that's called, is sort of tethered to the side because it only rings once a year on September 11th. That's when they cut it loose and they let it ring again. So only one time a year that they ring this. So this bell, yes, exactly, it's getting close, right? I haven't even thought of that. Underneath the bell is a handy little map. So we've got the 2 twin towers here. You see the squares, right? This is the South Tower and this is the North Tower. This right here is this is 1 and 2. This one over here is number 3, right? These are much shorter, by the way. This one is number 4, this is number 5, this is number 6, and 7 is off the map because it's that added on building, right? Not everyone included it, and I guess the British didn't include it, right? So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, when the towers fall straight down, there's damage done to all of the buildings around it, right? So all 4 buildings are brought down by way of controlled demolition. So they were imploded. You ever see how they do that? So they bring them down safely because they were deemed dangerous. Now there were 4 other buildings that were also deemed dangerous. There was 2 banks and a church, a Greek Orthodox church called St. Nicholas. Now the significant bank, and the 4th one that was deemed dangerous is the Winter Garden Atrium, but that was completely restored. I didn't mention this, and I want to mention this. Inside the Winter Garden Atrium were 8 of the tallest palm trees in North America. Wow. They were imported from the Mojave Desert and replanted in that building's, in the atrium of the building. those trees were shredded when the debris came flying through, right? So nothing left of those trees after 9/11. They replaced them after the fact with trees from the same area, so like their cousins in the Mojave Desert, and planted them in the same place. And then they kind of died from a blight, so they unfortunately were replaced again. We'll actually see them today. But I wanted to make sure you understood the intensity of the destruction. So all 4 of these buildings, plus 4 other buildings that were deemed dangerous. The only one that saved is the Winter Garden Atrium. The other one, the 2 banks, the one that's really significant is the Deutsche Bank. And that is significant because it was so, for a couple of reasons. It was very stubbornly built, first of all. So when they were trying to decide whether it should be torn down or whether they should restore it, there was a lot of disagreement within. So they said, let's wait, right? Now somehow, and I don't know how this happened, but they dragged their feet, and inspectors, the proper inspections never happened of the building, right? So they sent inspectors up to the roof, like 2 years after. And they actually went with a sort of a chief inspector to go do an inspection, and they found in bone fragments remains of 400 people that they had not discovered until that point, right? So once they get that all collected and cataloged, DNA researched and identified for the families, then they were given the green light to implode the building. Right? So they finally bring the building down, or they want to bring the building down, but they set charges and nothing happens. A fire starts on the 13th floor and spreads to the 17th floor, and they have trouble putting it out. So they of course send more firemen up there. 2 more firemen die. This is 2 years after 9/11. So the story just sort of continues and continues. So that's the significant fact. The other one was St. Nicholas Church, which was like a storefront church.